For 6 years, my guide dog Apollo was my sight. The day police killed him, they shattered my world, and unleashed a federal judge they never saw coming. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and damp leaves, a perfume I've always associated with justice and the start of a new court session. My world, a carefully curated map of sounds, smells, and textures, was perfectly in order. The solid, reassuring weight of Apollo's harness was in my left hand, a living extension of my own senses. His paws made a soft rhythmic patter on the pavement, a steady beat in the symphony of our afternoon walk. He was a magnificent German shepherd, a 90-pound guardian angel with a coat the color of sable, and a soul brighter than any light I could remember seeing. For 6 years since the accident that stole my sight, he had been my eyes, my confidence, my unwavering companion. We were 3 blocks from my brownstone when the harmony of our walk was shattered. It wasn't the siren that first alerted me, but the abrupt change in Apollo. He stopped dead, his body tensing under the harness, a low, questioning rumble vibrating up my arm. He never growled. Not in that way. It was a sound of deep concern, not aggression. Then I heard it, the slam of car doors and the aggressive squeak of leather holsters as 2 sets of heavy footsteps approached, fast. "Ma'am, step away from the dog." A voice, sharp and young, cut through the quiet afternoon. I tightened my grip on the harness, turning my head toward the sound. "Officer, this is a service animal," I stated, keeping my voice as level and calm as I would in my own courtroom. "Panic is a luxury I cannot afford. He is not a threat." "We got a call about a vicious dog menacing a woman," a second older voice boomed. It was gruff, impatient, and laden with an authority that bordered on contempt. "Looks like we found it. Now back away and put your hands where I can see them." My blood ran cold. Menacing a woman? I was the woman. Someone had seen a large black woman with a large German shepherd, and their imagination, marinated in prejudice, had filled in the rest. "Officers, you're mistaken," I said, enunciating each word with precision. "My name is Evelyn Hayes. This is my guide dog, Apollo. He is clearly marked with his vest and harness. We are simply walking home." I could hear the agitated shifting of their feet on the gravel path. They were close now. Too close. Apollo, sensing my distress and their hostility, shifted his weight to stand slightly in front of me, a living shield. The low rumble in his chest deepened. He wasn't growling at them, he was communicating with me, telling me there was danger. "It's getting aggressive," the young one shouted, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "He is not aggressive. He is protecting me from your aggressive posture," I countered, my own voice rising despite my best efforts. "You are frightening him. Please lower your voices and step back." "Control your animal, ma'am, or we will," the older one barked. I felt a sudden sharp tug on the harness as Apollo sidestepped. What were they doing? Were they trying to grab him? I heard a metallic click-a sound I knew from countless evidence presentations, the sound of a holster's safety being unlatched. "No," I screamed, a raw primal sound torn from my throat. "He is a service dog. You can't. That's a federal crime." The world exploded. The crack was so loud it felt like it split the air right next to my ear. It was followed instantaneously by a sound that will haunt my nightmares until the day I die. A high-pitched yelp of pure agony and surprise from Apollo. The harness went limp in my hand. I felt a heavy, boneless thud against my leg, and then nothing. His weight, his solid guiding presence was just gone. The silence that followed was more profound than my own darkness. The scent of wood smoke was choked out by the metallic tang of cordite. I dropped to my knees, my hands frantically searching the cold pavement, my fingers finding the thick, soft fur, then the sticky, wet warmth that was soaking into it. I heard a choked, gurgling breath, and then silence, utter, complete, and final. I stayed there, kneeling over my best friend's body, the world a meaningless void of sound and smell. The officers were talking, their voices a frantic, buzzing swarm of insects. "Oh God, Rick. Did you see it? It lunged. She said it was a service dog." "Shut up, just shut up." One of them approached me. I could smell his sweat and fear. Ma'am, we need you to stand up. We need to get your statement. We're going to need to see some identification. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my head in the direction of his voice. The tears that had been welling in my eyes now streamed down my cheeks, but my voice, when it came out, was devoid of all emotion. It was as cold and hard as a block of marble. "I am reaching into the left inner pocket of my coat now," I announced, my tone leaving no room for argument. My hand didn't shake as I retrieved the leather billfold. I didn't need to see it to know what was inside. I flipped it open with a practiced flick of my wrist and held it out in the space between us. "You wanted my identification. Here it is." I heard a sharp intake of breath from the officer. I heard the rustle of his partner stepping closer to look. The silence stretched, thick with dawning, catastrophic horror. "My name," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a shard of glass, "is Evelyn Hayes. I am a United States federal judge for the Southern District, and you two have just executed my service animal, a federally protected medical device in the middle of my street. So I suggest you get your union rep on the phone, because your lives as you know them are over." The younger officer made a choking sound, a mix of a gasp and a sob. The older one, Rick, was perfectly still for a moment before I heard the telltale rustle of fabric as he reached for his radio. His voice, when he finally spoke into it, was a strangled whisper, completely stripped of its earlier bluster. "Dispatch, we have a situation. Shots fired. Officer involved. We need a supervisor at my location. Forthwith." He didn't say anything about me. He didn't say anything about who I was. The omission was as loud as the gunshot had been. I didn't move. I couldn't. My knees were scraped raw on the concrete, and my hands were still resting on Apollo's flank. I could feel the life warmth already seeping out of him, leaving behind a cold, still weight that was no longer my dog. He was just a body, a piece of evidence. The thought was a fresh stab of pain, but it also ignited something else inside me, the cold, dispassionate fire of the law. My grief was a howling storm, but in its eye was a core of absolute, unshakable resolve. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with terrifying speed. The two officers stood frozen, statues of incompetence. I could hear their ragged breathing, the frantic thumping of their hearts. They were prey, and they knew it. A new car screeched to a halt. A heavy door slammed, and purposeful footsteps approached. This man's presence was different. He carried the weary authority of someone who cleans up messes for a living. "Rick, what the hell happened?" he demanded, his voice low and controlled. "Sarge, the dog. It lunged. We had a call. A vicious animal. It was an imminent threat," Rick stammered, the lie already taking shape, clumsy and weak. "Officers," I said, not lifting my head, my voice echoing slightly in the sudden quiet. "I would advise you to stop talking. Anything you say can and will be used against you." I wasn't just quoting the Miranda warning. I was issuing a promise. The sergeant came to stand over me. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Miller. I understand you're upset, but I need to ask you what happened here. Can we get you to sit in my patrol car? We can get the paramedics to check you out." He was trying to manage me, to move me off his crime scene, to separate me from the evidence of their atrocity. I finally lifted my head, my face a mask of cold fury. "You will do no such thing, Sergeant. This is now the scene of a federal crime under the Americans with Disabilities Act. You and your officers have interfered with and destroyed a piece of medical equipment, resulting in bodily harm to a protected individual. This scene is to be preserved, untouched, until the arrival of the U.S. Marshals, whom I will be calling momentarily. Your officers will surrender their weapons and their body cameras for forensic analysis. They will be placed in separate vehicles and they will not speak to each other. Is that understood?" There was a stunned silence. Sergeant Miller was not used to being given orders by civilians, especially not at one of his own scenes. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head as he tried to reconcile the weeping blind woman on the ground with the commanding presence issuing federal directives. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we have procedures," he began, his voice taking on a patronizing edge. "And I am telling you that federal procedure now supersedes yours, I cut him off. My name, which your officers already know, is Judge Evelyn Hayes. You can call the U.S. Attorney's Office for confirmation if you'd like. But I assure you, Sergeant Miller, every second you waste trying to handle me is another second of obstruction of justice that will be added to the mountain of charges you and your department are about to face. He took a step back. I heard him mutter a curse under his breath. He knew I wasn't bluffing. The power in the street had shifted so completely it was almost a physical force. He turned to his men. You heard her. Get in the damn cars. Now. It was then that another voice pierced the tension. An older woman's voice, thin and reedy, but filled with a breathless, gossipy excitement. Oh my goodness, is she all right? I saw the whole thing from my window. I turned my head toward the sound. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a woman who subsisted on curtain twitching and neighborhood drama. She was the one who complained about my recycling bin being 2 inches too close to the curb. Sergeant Miller's head snapped toward her, a flicker of hope in his posture. A witness. An independent witness. "Ma'am, you saw what happened?" he asked, his voice suddenly smooth as silk. "Oh, yes," she chirped, scurrying closer. "That poor woman. The dog was just dragging her, completely out of control. It was snarling, barking, a real menace. I was just about to call 911 myself when your brave officers arrived. They saved her." The lie hung in the air, thick and rancid. Mrs. Gable, in her desperate bid for relevance, had just thrown the officers a lifeline woven from pure fabrication. I could feel the tension in Sergeant Miller's shoulders ease. He had his narrative now. A frightened civilian, a brave intervention. My status as a judge would become a complication, an accusation of using my position to bully poor, heroic cops, rather than the core of the crime. I heard Rick let out a breath he'd probably been holding since he saw my credentials. They thought they were going to get away with it. My grief for Apollo was a physical weight, threatening to crush me, but the jurist inside me took over. This was no longer just about my dog. It was about the truth. It was about the abuse of power that I saw from my bench every single day, the kind of casual cruelty that flourishes in the dark, shielded by a badge and a plausible lie. I didn't say a word. I let them have their moment. I listened as Sergeant Miller took Mrs. Gable's statement, his voice dripping with false concern and encouragement. I listened as other units arrived, setting up a perimeter, treating me like a suspect in my own tragedy. They tried to make me move to get me away from Apollo's body, but I refused. I remained kneeling beside him, a silent, unmovable monument to their crime. It took 45 minutes for the U.S. Marshals to arrive, followed closely by the Chief of Police and an assistant U.S. attorney I'd known for years. The moment they stepped onto the scene, the atmosphere changed again. The local cops, who had been strutting with renewed confidence, suddenly looked small and nervous. Evelyn? My God. It was David Chen, the AUSA. He knelt beside me, his voice soft with genuine shock and compassion. "Are you hurt?" "They killed my dog, David," I said, my voice finally cracking. The dam of composure broke, and a single shuddering sob escaped me. "We'll handle this," he said, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. "I promise you." And they did. The investigation was swift and brutal. The officer's initial story, bolstered by Mrs. Gable's eager testimony, began to fall apart almost immediately. Their body cameras, which they had conveniently forgotten to activate until after the shot was fired, were taken into federal custody. But they had made a critical, arrogant mistake. They assumed the only evidence was what they could see and control. They forgot that in my world, I rely on other senses. In the formal interview, with my lawyer and David present, I recounted the events not as a victim, but as a witness. I described the precise sound of their footsteps, their distance, the aggressive tone that had put Apollo on alert. I described the exact click of the holster safety, a sound that came before any alleged lunge. But the nail in their coffin wasn't something I had heard. It was something I had felt. The younger officer, Officer Jensen, claims the dog lunged at him, forcing Officer Rickman to fire, David said, reading from their report. "That's impossible," I stated, my voice flat. "Apollo was a highly trained guide dog. His primary command in a perceived threat is brace. He positions himself between me and the danger and becomes immobile. He did exactly that. I felt his muscles tense, but he did not move forward. He was a living shield, not a weapon. I then explained how I felt the subtle shift in pressure on the harness, as Apollo was forced to sidestep, not forward, but to his left, away from Jensen, just before the shot. Their narrative required Apollo to lunge forward. My tactile evidence proved he had moved sideways, reacting to something, not attacking. But what? The answer came from an unexpected place. During the federal canvass of the neighborhood, investigators found a home security camera 2 houses down, one those officers had missed. It was angled perfectly. The video was played for me in David's office, narrated by a forensic analyst. It showed everything. The officers approaching aggressively. It showed Apollo taking his protective stance just as I'd described. It showed Officer Jensen, the younger one, reaching out and kicking my dog in the ribs. Apollo yelped and stumbled sideways, the exact motion I had felt through the harness. And as he stumbled, Rickman drew his weapon and fired. There was no lunge. There was no menace. There was only a malicious assault followed by a cold-blooded execution. Mrs. Gable, when confronted with the video and the threat of a federal perjury charge, crumbled instantly, admitting she hadn't seen anything clearly but had wanted to help the nice officers. The fallout was catastrophic for the department. The 2 officers were fired and indicted on federal charges, including deprivation of rights under color of law and destruction of a service animal. They both ended up taking plea deals that guaranteed them prison time. Sergeant Miller was demoted for his handling of the scene and retired in disgrace a month later. The city settled with me for an amount that was record-breaking, every penny of which I used to establish a new legal defense fund for disabled individuals whose rights have been violated by law enforcement. It's been a year. There is a new weight in my left hand now. A beautiful black lab named Justice. She is gentle and loving, but she is not Apollo. Nothing ever will be. Sometimes on our walks we pass that spot on the sidewalk. I always stop. Justice will sit patiently, leaning against my leg, sensing the shift in my mood. I don't need my sight to see him there. I can feel the memory of his loyalty, his courage, his unconditional love. They took my eyes, but they couldn't take my voice. And in Apollo's name, I will spend the rest of my life making sure the world hears it.